Today's case is about Estibaliz Carranza, aka the ice cream killer. What do you get when you combine a leg with a ton of ice cream? A horrible surprise. Yep, today's killer took the lives of both of her lovers and chopped up their body parts with a chainsaw, then hid their body parts inside of ice cream tubs and stored them in her own ice cream parlor. This puts a whole new meaning to the saying, I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. Goizargi Estibaliz Carranza Zabala, also known as Esti, was born in Mexico City on September 6, 1978, to her parents Armando and Angela. Armando was a journalist, author, and political commentator who had a lot of opinions on the Mexican government. He wrote articles criticizing the system, and because of his outspoken nature, he was marked as an activist. But this didn't fly with the government, and armed forces were sent to raid the family house. This had a lasting impact on Esti. Now, if a bunch of armed men stormed my house, trampled on my toys, and terrorized my family, I'm sure that would also cause some irreversible damage. After this, it was clear that staying in Mexico wasn't safe anymore, so the family fled to Barcelona. Unfortunately, things wouldn't get much easier, and the move really affected Esti's father. Barcelona was crazy expensive, like way more expensive than Mexico City, which meant Armando had to work twice as hard to support his family. He continued his work as a journalist and author, but didn't feel passionate about what he was told to write about. He would spend hours on his typewriter, pounding the pavement, just trying to make enough money. With all of this financial stress on Armando's shoulders, he turned into a controlling, dismissive father. Esti had to act like she didn't exist, walking on eggshells, terrified of when her father would explode next. He was more of a tyrant than a father, and Esti just forced herself to be as quiet and as small as she could. During this time, Esti admitted she had serious thoughts about harming her father. Even though she never acted on these impulses, they would prove incredibly influential for her down the line. If it wasn't bad enough that Esti felt on edge at home, her school life wasn't much better. She had trouble making friends and felt out of place everywhere. Especially as a migrant from Mexico, she felt like other kids looked down on her and thought of her as less than. Eventually, her parents had another child, giving Esti a baby brother. She fell in love with him instantly, and this was the moment where everything shifted for her. From that point on, Esti's dream was to become a wife and a mother. As Esti got older, she would start to date, and while guys her age would approach her at bars, she would always find herself drawn to older men with significant age gaps. When she was about 17 years old, Esti got into her first real relationship. She was enamored with this guy and was fully ready to get married, move into a home, and start a family with him. Her boyfriend made it clear that he wasn't in the same spot as her and ended the relationship. This broke Esti's heart. She had planned out their lives already, and to hear that this wasn't reciprocated was a punch in the gut. This was the moment she began fantasizing about murdering her ex in different ways. Cutting the brakes to his car, perhaps? Esti's family saw how hard she was taking the breakup and really felt for her. After she graduated from high school, they sent her to Munich, Germany to work as an au pair for the summer. Well, Germany seemed to be the perfect trick for Esti. She loved the culture and picked up the language fairly quickly. After the summer ended, she didn't want to leave just yet and extended her visa. She moved a few hours away from her au pair job to Nuremberg, where she got a job at an ice cream parlor. And that's where Holger appeared. At this point, Esti was in her early 20s, but still had her eye on older men. Holger was a 36-year-old refrigerator salesman who bore a crazy resemblance to her ex from Spain, except this guy was 15 years older than her. Holger walked into the ice cream shop, and the two hit it off right away. The two started dating shortly after, and a few weeks from then, Holger proposed to Esti. This was everything that she wanted. An older man who wanted to settle down? Jackpot. But Holger believed in Hare Krishna and said he wanted to wait until marriage to be intimate. Furthermore, he felt the act should only be for the sake of procreation and nothing more. Esti didn't mind this though. She wanted kids, so the whole procreation deal didn't seem so bad. So in 2002, the two got married in a super small ceremony in which neither of their families attended. To be fair, they only knew each other for like half a second before they tied the knot, so I can understand the family's skepticism towards the marriage. Deep down though, Esti knew things were moving too fast, but everything had already been put into motion. It was too late to back out now. And if I can just interject here, y'all, please do not go through a marriage if you have significant doubts. Divorce is messy and frickin' expensive. It's not worth it. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And wouldn't you know it, shortly after, the marriage went downhill fast. Esti said that Holger was an emotionally abusive husband, flip-flopping between disgust and admiration for her. It was inconsistent. And just like her own father, she was walking on eggshells around her own husband. Esti was determined to have children regardless of her feeling towards her new husband. But Holger thought having kids was too much of a giant step to take and said he wasn't ready. The two decided to move to Holger's hometown of Berlin, and once again, Esti found work at an ice cream shop. Holger continued his refrigerator salesman job, but quickly lost it. After being unemployed for a bit, Holger suggested that the two move yet again to Austria to open up their own ice cream parlor. Esti wasn't entirely on board until Holger dangled the prospect of children in her face. He said if she moved with him and opened this ice cream parlor together, then he would give her children, which is so beyond really messed up because he had zero intention of giving them to her. Just like that, they moved to Vienna, Austria, and opened up their own ice cream parlor called Schleckeria. Almost immediately, it became evident that Holger had no intention of having children or helping with the ice cream shop. Esti did all the hard work, which ate away at her for years. Holger is also said to be verbally and physically abusive to Esti. He would tell her how unattractive she was and would hate on her body. This did nothing but hurt her self-esteem and made her feel trapped. I'm not justifying what Esti does later on, but I can't even imagine how this must have felt for her. Jump forward to 2007. Esti is still working in this ice cream shop, childless, when a 48-year-old ice cream machine salesman named Manfred walks into her parlor. The two start chatting and instantly click. I, for one, have major deja vu. Manfred was 15 years older than Esti. He was charming, charismatic. He flirted with Esti, complimenting her, which made her feel beautiful again. And even though he knew she was married, he still decided to shoot a shot. Esti agreed to secretly meet with him, and the two started their own little secret love affair. The affair lasted for a little while before Manfred convinced Esti to get a divorce. To her surprise, Holger agreed to the separation, but refused to move out of the apartment. Esti thought that this was utterly ridiculous, as she was the one running the business on her own and handling the finances. The divorce was finalized, and Esti thought that this was it. Finally, she could have the children she'd always dreamt of having. But Manfred dropped a bomb on her. He wasn't ready to have children with her because he had been previously married and had kids of his own. This was a huge point of contention, and the two broke up for some time. With consistently terrible news and the overwhelming feeling of loneliness, Esti's emotions were a 50 on a scale from 1 to 10. So in April of 2008, she returned to the apartment after a long day running the ice cream parlor by herself and asked Holger to move out once again. Of course, he didn't want to have that conversation. Still, he got a few low blows in, telling Esti she was useless and she could never survive without him, which, dude, she's been doing that precisely for a couple years now. Even still, that doesn't justify the horrific thing that she was about to do to him. When his back was turned, she picked out one of his Beretta 22 caliber handguns sitting on the table and fired 2 warning shots into the back of his head. She went on to say, I was absolutely helpless. I thought that I would never get my life back. After committing the murder, she went back to work, leaving Holger's body lifeless and on the floor for multiple days. When she finally got back home, she decided the best option was to burn the body inside the apartment. Obviously, this wasn't a crematory, so the body didn't instantly just turn into ashes, and the fire department was called because of the amount of smoke. Esti came up with some BS excuse about how she burnt her fish dinner to steer the police away from her when they arrived. Somehow, the authorities believed this excuse and let her be. At that point, Esti knew that she had to dispose of the body somehow. It was stinking up the entire building. People were complaining, and she just couldn't keep him there forever. Her plan? Purchase a chainsaw, dismember the body, put the pieces into buckets, and fill them with cement. Afterwards, hide the buckets inside of her ice cream parlor. It took her 2 days to fully take apart his body because it was a lot for her to process in just 1 day. Neither Holger nor Esti knew many people, so nobody noticed that Holger wasn't around. Anybody that did know them just kind of assumed that he finally moved out. Esti told them that Holger had moved to India, and that's why he wasn't reported as a missing person. She called a taxi to her apartment where they helped her load up the cement buckets into the trunk. She was like, oh no, I'm just renovating my business, and that was enough. She stored them in the cellar freezers. After all the loose ends had been tied up, Esti continued to live life like everything was totally cool and normal. Business as usual. Running an ice cream parlor with a body in the basement, no big deal. 3 years went by before Esti and Manfred would get back together. But this second time around didn't last very long, as Manfred didn't want to settle down with her. He even suggested that they have an open relationship, which just ripped her to shreds. Esti had this sneaking suspicion that Manfred was cheating on her. And wouldn't you know it, after searching through all of his things, Esti found some pretty damning stuff. He was active on dating sites, chatting and texting with other women, and even getting explicit photos from them. Esti knew that Manfred had to go, but this time, she'd be prepared. Over the next year, Esti took lessons at a shooting range to practice her aim and even attended concrete mixing classes, which I didn't even know was a thing until right now. Esti purchased a new chainsaw and enough concrete for a human body. However, she would later say that she would merely purchase those items and never really intended on using them. On November 21st, 2010, Esti put her plan into motion. That evening, the couple went on a date and got pretty drunk. Manfred kept eyeing up other women in front of Esti, which deeply hurt her. It felt like he was doing it on purpose. When they got home late that night, they almost immediately started arguing. She gave him one last chance. Essentially, either he goes to therapy or they break up. This really upset him, and he said that he'd do it all on his own accord. After this, they went to bed. But Manfred started snoring really loudly, which was the final straw for Esti. She grabbed a firearm from under the mattress, loaded it, and fired it 4 times, point blank range, right into his head. After this, she left the body untouched for multiple days until coming back to dismember him. Then, just as she had done with her previous husband, Esti placed each body part into separate tubs and covered them with concrete. She hauled it all to the ice cream shop and hid them down in the cellar. Afterwards, she took herself to a nail salon to get a manicure. This time around was different though. More people knew Manfred and would obviously notice if he wasn't around. So 4 days after the murder, Esti filed a missing persons report with the police and played the confused, helpless victim act. No one suspected Esti of anything, and in fact, people felt sorry for her. Some of Manfred's friends came around to comfort Esti. One in particular was named Roland. The two had formed a close relationship that eventually developed into more. This woman has a type and she is sticking to it. Roland was with another woman when he and Esti were spending time together, but he broke that off to be with Esti instead. Esti discovered that she was pregnant with Roland's child after only dating for 5 months, and while he was shocked, he seemed pretty happy with the news. She asked him to marry her and he said yes. And at this point, Esti had everything she wanted. She was gonna be a mother, wife, and business owner. But this would be a short-lived victory. There was a hairdresser right next to Esti's ice cream parlor, and a pipe had burst. For the plumber to fix it, he needed to knock down a locked door connected to the ice cream shop's cellar. I think you can kind of see where this is going. As Esti goes into her shop on June 7th, 2011, and notices that everybody's acting super freaking weird and whispering about what's going down in the cellar, her ears perked up a little bit. She's like, what the hell did you find in the cellar? And her neighbor tells her that they believe Manfred's body was found down there. Esti just laughs this off, but secretly she's screaming in her head and she starts to calmly book it out of there. She knew that she had been caught, but still had the chance to GTFO. She emptied out her bank account, got her passport, and booked a ticket to Paris. But she realized the cops would probably be there to stop her, so instead, she hopped in a taxi and went to Italy. She even had time on her escape to pop into a hairdresser to color her hair a darker shade. After avoiding the police for multiple days, meeting people who could have easily turned her in, on June 10th, a street performer Esti had met along the way ended up doing just that. Esti was arrested, and that morning, she experienced bleeding. Scared that she would lose her baby, she confessed to everything just to receive medical attention. She was taken there, but was extradited back to Austria, where she awaited trial. While in prison, she gave birth and married Roland. He adored her, and she said he was nothing like her past lovers. She even said that she would have never become a killer had she met Roland earlier in life. A psychiatric evaluation was done on Esti. They concluded Esti was perfectly sane during the murder, but did suffer from a severe personality disorder. She felt committing these acts was her only way out of the situation. On the first day of the trial, Esti confessed to everything. She described her actions as disgusting and even expressed thoughts of suicide. She didn't want anyone to pity her, and that's why she'd been so cold and looked like she didn't have any remorse. And Esti was a very beautiful woman who scooped ice cream for a living. Her good girl gone bad act was entertaining, and people were fascinated with the story. The jury, however, saw through all of this. On November 2nd, 2012, Esti was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. She agreed with the sentencing, but felt grief for leaving her 2 sons essentially motherless. In 2015, Roland and Esti divorced. And in 2017, Esti was transferred from an all-female prison to an all-male prison. She was apparently too dangerous to stay with the other women. Still, I can't imagine how locking her up with a bunch of men is any better. The reason for this was the intense psychological care and medical professionals at this new facility. Esti wrote and published a book called My 2 Lives, The True Story of the Ice Lady, where she tells her side of the story. Wow, that was one wild ride. Thanks for tuning into Killer Bites. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll see you next time. I'm Danny. Thanks for watching.